see that.
Oh,
yes.
there we are.
So
we're here.
Great. Yeah. Okay. So do you want to start that?
Okay. You ready for us to take it away?
Yes, please.
All right. So as was mentioned, our objective when we started our garden was to attract wildlife. And we've been at it for about 20 years. And we're in the inner Richmond. And we are actually, for those who are interested or participate in iNaturalist, if you can go on iNaturalist and hover over around 8th Avenue at Fulton and find the pins. We have lots of pins in our backyard, and you can check out the species that we've documented. So next slide, please. So in the presentation that we're gonna give you, we're gonna ask a few questions and cover some topics. We're gonna ask, why are birds a good group of animals to focus on in relation to our gardening? We're gonna cover the basic needs of birds and how your garden can attract and benefit birds. We're going to look at some specific considerations that are relevant to the endeavor that we're taking on. And we're going to cover some of the expectations of the backyard birdwatcher.
One other thing I'm going to mention is this photograph is eastern birds mostly, so I wouldn't really expect those birds. The birds in the first slide are the ones that you would be expecting to see.
And the rest of the presentation has all local birds. But first we're going to, before we get going, we're going to put it in context a little bit, comparing what we have, our plot of land, compared to what a suburban or a rural gardener might have. Now, this is an example of Veronica Bauer's garden from Petaluma, and she has on YouTube, she has a presentation called Wildscaping for Native Songbirds that you might want to check out. So she has 2 acres of land, and she's documented 70 species of birds and 30 nesting species, which is quite impressive for a 2-acre plot. So bear that in mind. Now, next slide, please. So what we have in the city is 25 feet by 60 feet yard. And we've documented in 20 years of observation about 50 species, and we've not had any confirmed nesting in our yard.
But we have observed some behavior. We've observed nesting material being brought into the yard and into that dense middle, but we haven't confirmed that there's actually been a nest yet.
But there is potential, and that's one of our, that would be a highlight for us if we actually had a nesting species. But even though we have not had nesting, we've had, we can be confident that during the summertime, in the spring, birds are benefiting because we see them collecting nesting material and such. So
there's limitations of having a small plot, but it's better than having nothing. And you can see just a small little area can really bring in quite a few species.
Okay, next. So why birds? Why birds? So we're all excited about our native plants, and we love our native plant gardens. So if we're going to focus on a group of animals, why should we focus on birds? Well, let's have a look and see. Birds are very observable.
Most of the time.
Most of the time. So let's run down the list here. They're scaled. They're at a size that we can observe very easily. They're conspicuous. So they allow us to approach close enough. we can distinguish them visually, species by species, and also they sing, and each species has usually has a unique song that we can determine to species.
And in general, they're not dangerous unless you live in Australia.
Yeah, and they're mostly out during the daytime. So that makes them all very and easily observable by us. So birds have a great diversity. There's about 10,000 species in the world. They expand over the whole globe, and each species fills a particular ecological niche. Next, please. So birds have relevance to us. Biologically, they're pretty close to us from an evolutionary standpoint. They're vertebrate animals, so much of their life requirements are similar to ours. As we mentioned, they span throughout the globe geographically, and they're distributed by habitat types. So it's a little different distribution system than our political boundaries. So by studying birds, we can get a little different take on how the world is divided up by habitat type. Additionally, they migrate. So some birds migrate. So they may live, say, in South America, and they may end up in our backyards during the summer. So it can spur our own thinking on a global scale. Birds are good indicators of the health of the ecosystem. The proverbial canary in the coal mine is depicted here. And lastly, but not least, we have found, of course, and it's pretty obvious that the plant-loving community and the bird-loving community gets along very well and blends very well. And we found that these two communities are full of really fun and knowledgeable and nice people.
Which also is that the similarities between birds and humans is that birds actually have their own social hierarchy, and there's a culture within each species and a culture amongst themselves. So it's kind of a fun thing to think about.
Next, please. Birds are educational. By studying birds and their relationship to the plants that we love so much, we can gain a greater, deeper understanding of those plants and the benefit that those plants bring to the ecosystems. We can also enhance our understanding of the seasons. Out here in San Francisco, we don't have the really well-defined seasons like maybe back east. And we do see the seasonality as we observe our plants, but by observing the seasonality of the birds, it can enhance that knowledge for us. And there are much more things to learn about birds. Seemingly, the more, when you start observing birds, it leads to more questions and kind of down a rabbit hole of exploration and knowledge. And it's pretty much endless. We've been at it for a long time, and we still learn something new all the time. And by gardening for birds, it's a meaningful action. It's stewardship that you partake of or that you plan for in your own yard, but it goes beyond the boundaries of your yard. As I mentioned, in one example is in the summer when we see birds coming into our yard. They're feeding, they're bathing, they're gathering nesting material, and we know that they're using our yard for resources, but bringing those resources off to wherever their nest locations are, somewhere in the neighborhood, and their young are benefiting from that. So it's not just providing for birds in our yard, but it's providing for the greater community of birds and wildlife.
So what do birds need? Food.
Yeah, birds need a few things. So food is one of the primary needs of birds, of course, like us. And they get their food from different sources, different types of birds, different species of birds feed on different sources. Some use nectar.
Like hummingbirds.
Hummingbirds, yes. And some use seed.
Sparrows and finches and other birds like that.
And some birds eat insects.
The warblers, chickadees, vireos, and more.
They're fruit-eating birds.
Like the thrushes and waxwings. As you see pictured here, that's a cedar waxwing. One of the coolest birds. It's kind of hard to see sometimes because they go up high, but if you got one in your yard with a toy on, how cool is that?
And even rodents, we've actually had, we witnessed or observed birds eating rodents from our yard. JoAnn's going to tell a little story.
Yeah, a few weeks ago, I was looking in the yard watching the birds in the baths, and I noticed a little field mice run across our little trail, and I was just like, wow, okay, there's little mice there. Well, a couple days later, here's a red-shouldered hawk. We're in a pretty dense area here, so all behind us is all just backyards, and a red-shouldered hawk was like on the fence with one of those field mice, so that's pretty cool. You can even be bringing in things in your yard as big as a hawk and as small as a hummingbird, so that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, so it's this abundance and diversity that can draw in a broader spectrum of bird species. So we have about at least 40 different species of plants in that small yard, producing the nectar, the seed, the insects, the fruit, and the rodents. And because of that, we have enjoyed a pretty broad spectrum of bird species that come and gather the resources in our yard.
What else do they need?
Water. Birds need water. So besides the food, which is provided by the abundance of plants that we have in our garden, water is the next main thing. And water does a really good job at drawing birds to your yard. And this can be done with bird baths or bubblers or drips or even ponds. Now, we have restricted ourselves to bird baths. We've not tried the fancier bubbler systems and drips. We're kind of minimalist, and we like to keep it simple. So we've done bird baths, and we've had good success with that. We found over the years, initially we started off with one large bird bath, and we found over the years that multiple smaller bird baths seems to work better at our location. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit.
What else do birds need?
Next, please.
They need shelter.
Shelter. So by allowing our yards to grow dense and thick, provides that shelter. The birds need shelter to evade predators is one of the primary reasons. It's not easy being a bird out there. They're always vulnerable to predation from other animals and even from other birds. Birds need roosting places during the day when they're resting, and at night when they're sleeping. They need spots that are safe and secure to do that. And birds need nesting sites, maybe not in your yard, but maybe somewhere nearby in a nearby park. But whether or not they're nesting in your yard, they still need a place to collect nesting material, and your yard can provide a good source of nesting material. Next, please. So what are some considerations beyond the basic needs of birds that we should think about as we take on the endeavor of trying to draw wildlife into our backyard? Next, please. So the first thing I think every gardener should consider is these hazards.
As you can see by the photos there, the domestic cats, windows, and artificial light are kind of the three main things that you need to be thinking about.
Yeah, in our experience, the windows on the back of our house are pretty small, and we've not had a problem at our location, but it is a very well documented hazard for birds. Many birds die annually by window strikes. So if you do have large windows at the back of your house, you should pay attention and observe if that ends up being hazardous for the birds. There are techniques that can be employed to reduce that hazard. The reason why they strike windows, by the way, is one of the reasons is that the windows reflect
the yard.
The yard, and the birds don't realize that it's a window. They think it's just more vegetation and more yard, so they'll, unbeknownst to them, they fly right into it. Domestic cats are quite a big problem. Yeah, in the U.S., the figures that I've researched, in the U.S., domestic cats kill over 1 billion birds annually. That's billion with a B, and that's a conservative figure. So when you're, now we can break this down into two different categories. We can break it, so one category is your own cats that you can manage and have control over, or other cats that are neighbors' cats, free roaming cats. Now we did years ago, we had 2 cats of our own, and they were indoor-outdoor cats. And as we learned the drawbacks of allowing cats to go outdoors, we decided to transition our cats into indoor cats. And it was very, in our situation, it was very easy to do, and we had great success doing that. The cats transitioned pretty readily, and in a short while, they were perfectly contented to be indoors. And as a result, our vet bill went down.
Well, also, if you have your own cats and people complain, oh, they need to be outside, there are other options like these catios where you can build a little thing on the outside of your yard, or, put something outside, like in a cage where the cat can actually be outside.
Yeah, it's like a little arboretum for a cat.
For a cat.
Yeah.
And I know neighborhood cats are an issue too as a gardener, because cats will come and poop in your yard, especially our yard. We had a neighbor complain that our yard was a big sandbox, and asked where we got all the sand, which was like, we're shaking our heads like, this is what is here. This is native stuff. So that can be an issue as well. I'm not sure. More diplomacy can be needed when you're dealing with neighbors' cats or feral cats. Don't really have all the answers other than encouraging people to talk with your neighbors and let them know. Give them some statistics. There are flyers that you can provide. And actually, if they're taking care of their cat, most of the vets in the SPCA do recommend all cats stay indoors for their health. So that's something. And then now go into artificial light. As you can see, this huge home, most of us in San Francisco don't have the lights like this. If you want or need lighting for safety reasons, you could have your lights on a motion sensor, because the birds and other animals, insects, get confused. So it's to enjoy your garden and the plants during the day is the best time instead of lighting them up at night. But if you have those solar lights or something, to have them on a motion sensor would be more beneficial.
Yeah, the light at night is detrimental because it alters the environment, and it throws off the timing sensibilities of not just birds, but all wildlife.
Moving on to other pests. So here, pictured here, we have had issues with all three of these.
Right, so raccoons come through our yard once in a while. Oh, back, please. Yeah, raccoons come through the yard once in a while, and they get into the bird baths and sometimes tip them over.
They like to wash their food, and so they like to utilize our bird baths.
Right. So they're there. They're a little bit pesty, but they haven't been overly problematic.
They have crushed our lupin.
The crows and ravens can be problematic if they're attracted to your yard and set up shop there. They wash their food in the bird baths, and they bully out the other birds. So one of the remedies that we employed was just reducing the size of our bird baths. And that discouraged the crows and ravens from coming. There was a period of time when the crows and ravens were really problematic.
Well, they were bringing things like greasy chicken bones and greasy chicken and getting the grease in our bird baths. And actually what our bird baths are clay flower pots literally turned upside down. So a clay pot upside down, and the lower tray, we just put it right on top and fill it with water. And so that's what our actual bird baths are. And so we minimize those sizes of the trays. And the birds are very happy, especially small birds. Bush tits, I've seen as many as 6 or 8 bush tits in about an 8-inch diameter, or even a 5-inch diameter bird bath. And ants, I don't know what to say too much about what to do for them, because our hummingbird feeder got attacked this year for the first time by ants, and I just used some natural borax, I guess. I actually got it at Ace Hardware. They say it's natural, but it's safe for other pets or other animals and birds to help get those ants away. And then water is a good way to try to avoid having ants. I had seen that to use fishing line to hang your bird feeder, but that did not work. Ants will be able to climb on fishing line, and there's a little divot in the top of the hummingbird feeder, and I have found that keeping that full of water has also deterred them. So
yeah, that's like a little moat.
It has been, yeah. So anyway, there's lots of resources. If you just Google hummingbird feeders and ants, there's lots of different resources on there. So
yeah, so the current strategy we're using now is having multiple feeders available, and so if one gets develops an ant problem, we just decommission that one for a few days, and the hummingbirds still have the other feeders to feed from. Next, please. So neighbors are something to consider. The landscaping of your neighbors has a big influence on your own yard. We're fortunate that some of our nearby neighbors have tall trees. We have a neighbor with a big cypress tree. We have a neighbor with a redwood tree and a neighbor with a pine tree. So we actually benefit from those trees being in our neighbor's yard. We do have a neighbor that has a basketball court similar to what's shown here. And of course, their yard doesn't do much for attracting birds. But I wanted to mention this because that's their thing, and they really use it a lot, and they enjoy the basketball court. And we see how much joy that gives them, and they see how much joy our yard gives to us. So we kind of sharing influence. And that's, one of the considerations is that we do have influence on our neighbors. And one of our kind of a secondary objective is to influence our neighbors. And it's worked a little bit. We have shared some plants with the neighbors, and we have seen their interests arise.
We've actually given neighbors some plants, and we have other neighbors that are going to be getting some this season as well. So that's kind of fun.
Yeah, and they inquire, and some of them are interested, and so it's a way of us to spread a little bit of information and to build community. Next, please. So maintenance is something that should be considered too. We just had a nice presentation on pruning, and that is something to consider if you're managing for birds. We want to avoid pruning during the nesting season. So typically in San Francisco, nesting can begin actually in December. Some of the hummingbirds start setting up shop in December, and the nesting season will go all the way through the spring into the mid to late summer. So what the technique we've employed is we restrict our pruning really to the fall months, September, October, and November. And really it's as it was mentioned in the previous presentation, that it's good to prune during warm weather because the damp weather can expose the cuts to pathogens.
And then deadheading and cleaning, it's like your yard. Typically, if all the buckwheat starts going to seed and it looks kind of unruly in your yard, or it may not look as pretty as when it was blooming, please refrain from deadheading those until the seeds have fallen, and that provides lots of feed for all of those seed-eating birds. In addition, the leaf litter that falls, try not to just clean all that up. Try to just leave it. We, as also was mentioned in the previous, is just to prune a little bit at a time. For example, when we deadhead our buckwheat in our yard, we just do it a little bit at a time and leave some for the birds. Some of the other plants, they may look unruly, but it's really best to just leave them as long as you can, straight into the beginning of spring, just to get it cleaned up. Bird baths for cleaning, like I mentioned, we just have very simple clay pots, and again, we have sandy dunes, and the way I clean it is just with water and sand, because they do need to stay, the water needs to stay fresh in there, and our birds, the birds use them, and so they get empty very quickly. So I just use a little bit of sand, a little bit of water, and use my hand, and it scrubs them clean. And hummingbird feeders also, again, there's lots of resources online, but you want to keep those as clean as possible. There's different ways to do it, trying not to use soap, and then to keep them bleached every so often. Here in the city, if you're in the city, it's not too warm, and so we're pretty fortunate with that. But I know if people leave their hummingbird feeders for long, it can really grow stuff. So you just want to be cognizant of that if you're going to put out a hummingbird feeder.
Yeah, and bird boxes, we have not ventured into that realm. I consider that to be kind of a very advanced technique.
To attract nesting birds.
Yeah, to attract nesting birds. And I think if you're to venture into the bird box realm, you want to do kind of a cost-benefit analysis and make sure that your yard, your area is extremely safe for the birds, so that the probability of them fledging the young would be pretty high.
And it's actually, as Matt said, it's pretty sophisticated, because there's lots of things to consider for the way the bird box is oriented for the north, south, east, west. There's just lots of stuff. So I would say, look online and look at other resources if you are interested in doing a bird box.
Okay, let's move on. So something to consider.
Matt and JoAnn, just want to
Yes.
remind you, we have about 10 minutes left, and I do want to save like a minute or two for a question.
Okay, we'll move a little quicker here. So something to consider is your proximity to parklands, the connective corridors, where you lie.
In proximity to
Right,
the
so-
parks,
so
what are
the-
you going to maybe see?
The larger parklands are more expansive and would have more bird diversity. And in our backyards, we're really catching kind of the overflow from those areas, and as the species move back and forth from the parks.
Knowing how the parks are managed themselves, we've learned a lot from the Presidio and from Golden Gate Park Natural Resources. How they manage that can help you think about what you might see and how you might manage your yard.
Okay, next. So stewardship is of course very important. It is a responsibility. Once we set up this system and we're attracting birds to the yard, we want to make sure that we keep it up. So it is a responsibility, but it's a big reward as well. And
that's a green hair-streaked butterfly you might be able to get in your yard, but the snowy plover that you see there that's banded, you probably won't unless you live on the beach. They actually stay in the...
But those are species that are of conservation concern, and the community, there are local communities that are making a concerted effort toward those species. And I just wanted to throw that in there, that there is community effort for conservation. Next, please.
What can you expect?
Right. What can you expect? So in our yard, we've observed 50 species over 20 years of time. Now, I'll go back. There we go. So about half of those species we've observed very few times, once or twice or three times maybe. But the other half we observe annually. Season by season, you'll notice the change. So next slide, please. Winter time has the greatest diversity. The birds are in mixed flocks. They're not concerned about being on their own for nesting. So they're in mixed flocks. So you get a combination of the year-round resident birds plus the winter resident birds. Next slide, please. During migration, spring and fall migration, birds are traversing our area. Some of them come to stay, but some of them are only passing through. So it's a good time to keep an eye out for unusual species. Next, please. Summertime has the lowest diversity, but we get regular individuals. So it's kind of fun sometimes. You'll notice the same individual all throughout the late spring and throughout the summer. And we have even noticed, probably almost every year, we see the fledglings of different species. It's fun to watch them as they develop and grow up a little bit.
Just a reminder that you have helped with any of the nesting needs of these birds to have the fledglings in your yard. Okay.
Next, please. Okay, so the final expectation is that the yard's going to change. Now, in the 20 years we've been at it, our yard has changed every single year. You guys all know that your native plants grow and change, but the habitat value changes season by season and year by year. And even so, the mix of bird species that are attracted to your yard changes over time too. Some seasons, some years you may notice a particular species in pretty good abundance and regularity, and that might last a couple of years, and then all of a sudden they're not around so much anymore, and different species is now presented in your yard with regularity.
Okay, that's it.
So that's the one big takeaway. It's going to change just like life does. Anyway,
Lots of resources.
we'll just go through a few resources here. Native Plant Society, of course, Golden Gate Audubon Society, Nature in the City, SF Rec and Park Department Natural Areas Program, which is a good way to learn. We have volunteered with them over the years, and we've learned so much about native plant habitats, and that knowledge we take from those volunteer experiences and bring it back and apply it to the yard, and it's helped us out quite a bit. iNaturalist, we mentioned. YouTube is a good resource, and of course, good old-fashioned books.
It's always good to have
your field guide ready. If you want to learn your birds, got to use the field guide.
and then there's always apps on the phone also. So get out there and explore.
Okay, I think we have one more slide, and then we're open for questions.
All of these birds have been observed in our yard.
Yeah, these are the kind of the more common birds that you could expect to attract if you set up if that's your motivation, you employ these methods we've described.
And no, that's not our photographs. All right.
So we've got some great questions here and comments. Linda Woodford is recommending Cornell University's eBird app.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And Marla Yanamine is saying that she got a penthouse from Perfect Fence to help regard the catios.
The catios are a good way to go. There's lots of information online about catios.
Cool.
Wonderful. What to do about recently abandoned bird nests and eaves? Leave them or remove them?
If they're done using them, I'd say it's up to you. It can be a maintenance problem for a structure to have a bird nest on it. So once they're done using them, it can be safely removed. But if you want the birds to nest again next year, you might want to leave it. But it doesn't harm the birds to remove it after they're done using it.
Especially if it's on a structure that, if it's in your yard, I would be hesitant to, because it just will compost into the yard. But if it's on a structure.
Yeah, that becomes a maintenance issue.
Got it. Linda Woodford also mentioned that birds like to have the water source be on the ground and close to vegetation to provide cover.
Very good point.
Yeah, on the ground or close to the ground.
Elevated by the length of the.
Yeah, but even the pedestal bird baths that you see in the garden shops, that the birds will use those too.
But that's a good point about keeping it near an area where they can quickly go up to get away, evade predators after they've done that, because we do keep one near the Toyon and one near our manzanita, and then the other one that's kind of just surrounded by buckwheat. They use it, but they like to go somewhere quick, be able to get away quickly. That's a good point. They also
like to, after they bathe, they like to preen. So it might be beneficial to use some of those pruning techniques and leave some bare branches nearby so that
they have a quick place.
They have a place to go, and that you can still observe them. They won't be so deep in the shrubs. So from a personal point of view, to want to observe the birds after they're done bathing, leave some exposed perches, and that will help.